Ocean Story is with you, and I have new stories that touch me. In my 23 years, I have endured the challenges of my twin Angela's illness. Her diagnosis of leukemia as a child left me feeling overshadowed by our parents. Angela and I were inseparable, but circumstances separated us. I was sent to boarding school, which changed our relationship forever. My return home didn't bring back the closeness of the past. I became withdrawn and distant. My parents, trying to preserve the memory of family togetherness, recently showed my boyfriend a photo album of our childhood with Angela. This gesture made me rethink the past and our childhood, marked by Angela's health struggles and my sense of loss. While I understand my parents' need to focus on Angela's treatment, I still can't completely shake the feeling that my childhood was lost because of their decisions. The years away from home left an indelible mark on my soul, creating a sense of isolation and disconnection that I still feel today. My boyfriend, interested in my past, was confronted with surprise when he learned that my childhood photos were missing, and my mother offered to look at Angela's pictures on the grounds of our twin resemblance. This caused my resentment, as Angela and I are two different individuals. My frustration increased when my mother shifted the responsibility for the lack of pictures to me, suggesting that I should have taken care of filling the family album myself. This approach emphasized the depth of misunderstanding between us and led to a serious conversation after my boyfriend left. We tried to make sense of our relationship, illuminating corners of the past that had long remained in the shadows. This dialogue was an opportunity not only to express my feelings of invisibility and missing out, but also to realize that each of us has a responsibility to preserve and pass on family history, leaving no one out. My mom shared with me that the previous conversation had opened wounds from the past when the entire family's attention was focused on Angela's struggle with illness. I admitted, not without hesitation, to resenting my parents for the long years of separation caused by their decision to keep me in boarding school even after my sister's recovery. My mother justified herself by saying that in their opinion, I had found my place and happiness there, and coming home would have ruined everything. My surprise at this explanation knew no bounds. I could not accept the idea that my so-called good childhood in the boarding school could compensate for the lack of family warmth and love. Having expressed this, I suddenly found myself in the midst of a family crisis. My mother was saddened by my words, and my father alarmed by my reaction to events so far back in time. He claimed that I did not realize the weight of the burden that had been placed on their shoulders and insisted that I apologize to my mother for being rude in my interactions. I realized that my words sounded too harsh, but I sincerely believe that I did not express anything unacceptable. I don't consider myself an idiot for expressing my feelings. After all, my parents never bothered to ask my opinion about being in boarding school, never tried to understand if I was really happy there. They didn't even seem to realize how much they missed from my life, offering to look at pictures of my sister as a substitute for my own memories. It only emphasized their detachment from my childhood. I wonder if they ever felt a sense of missing out, of regret that they might have missed important moments in my growth and development. Feeling as if they have repeated a pattern of behavior they learned as children, ignoring one child in favor of another, the so-called golden child, leaves me pondering the cycle of family relationships. It may seem as if they expect me to care for them in their old age, despite the lack of attention and care in my childhood. However, it is important to remember that family bonds, nurturing and understanding, should not be built on conventions and expectations, but on genuine attention and care. The decision to send me to boarding school was a stumbling block in my relationship with my parents, leaving little room for my childhood memories in the family album and emphasizing the preference for my sister. This act of unbalanced parenting was clear evidence to me of how I was left in the shadow of attention and care in my childhood. Now, on a journey of self-discovery and healing through therapy, I am beginning to reflect and discuss these feelings in an effort to prevent this kind of manipulation by my family. Imagining that I might become a parent in the future makes me wonder how my parents could have allowed such separation and alienation. The depth of my disappointment and resentment is reflected in the reaction of my mother, who, tearfully responding to my words, intuitively understands the validity of my feelings. She has to go through this unpleasant realization because the question of why it was necessary to keep me in the boarding school for so many years after Angela's recovery remains unanswered. My father, too, realizes the depth of the situation after I opened up and spoke my mind directly and honestly. It is important that both of my parents realize how difficult this time away from the family circle has been for me and how these years of separation affected our relationship. It's important to me that they realize that I was the result of their decisions, and it was the experience that pushed me away from my family, forcing me to rethink and reevaluate my place in it and in the world at large. Next story. When I was young, my parents, inspired by the majesty and beauty of nature, chose names for my brother and sister and me that reflected different aspects of the water element. Ocean became my sister's name, symbolizing vastness and depth. I was christened Cow, which represents the secluded bays where water hugs the land. River is my brother's name, representing the life-giving power of flowing water. Our parents strive to keep a unified theme while avoiding similarity in initials to emphasize the uniqueness of each of us. Over time, as we were all reclusive at home together, my parents began to consider the implications of their choices. One night at dinner, they shared their reflections, expressing regret that they may have given us names that could have created inconveniences in our lives. They apologized for any difficulties we might have had with the unusual choice of names and suggested the alternative of more traditional names, Elizabeth, James, and Michael, believing that as long as we were still young and not burdened with serious social responsibilities like college, we could afford to change our names. Our response was a unanimous and firm refusal. We value the uniqueness of our names and how they reflect our individuality and connection to nature. My father, trying to understand our choice, asked if we really wanted to keep our names. All of our answers were an emphatic no to the suggestion of change, emphasizing our attachment to the names we have carried all our lives. The idea of changing our parents' names seemed to them a way of correcting perceived past mistakes, but to us, their children, such a suggestion was something unusual and even ridiculous. The rejection we gave to their question about the name change was unanimous and strong. Our parents had discussed it with us many times, trying to convince us of the reasonableness of their decision. However, when my brother expressed his displeasure with the proposed name Michael, calling it trashy, they offered him an alternative, Charles, which caused him to reject it even more. Interestingly, my parents particularly focused on my brother after his name question, seeing him as the most open to change. But even his emphatic refusal did not prompt them to reconsider their position. In turn, I tried to explain to my parents that despite their regrets about the names they had chosen, we had all grown attached to them, found our identity in them, and did not aspire to more commonplace names. Our parents argued that in the future we might regret our decision not to change names and that the consequences of that choice would fall on our shoulders. But it was more important to us to maintain our uniqueness and identity that was bestowed upon us by the names chosen with love and hope by our parents. It became for us not just a matter of a name, but a matter of self-identity and commitment to our own history and roots. They claimed they were doing it out of concern for our future, but their attempt to impose their choice met with our firm refusal. My brother rejected the name Michael offered to him, calling it unfortunate, and he liked the alternative name Charles even less. Our parents interpreted our resistance as disrespect, while we simply wanted to preserve our individuality. We explained that our names are a part of us that we value and that our earliest memories are connected to. I emphasized that changing a name should be a personal choice and not pressure from others, even if they are parents. Now I want to tell a different story. After the loss of my mother in 2021, my family underwent a change, leaving me with my father and older brother within the walls of our ancestral home. Life continued to flow, and despite my brother's flight outside the family nest to find his own path, my father always emphasized that the doors of home would remain open for his return. Amidst the discussion of the future of our home over dinner, my brother made a suggestion that alarmed me. He wondered who would own the house after my father left, and upon hearing that we would both get the house, he suggested that I, while staying in the house, pay his rent. His plans for the future and his desire to turn the house into a cozy nest for his growing family made me uneasy, especially given his desire to reimagine the space of the house to accommodate his family's needs, including turning my sanctuary into a nursery or office. I can't bear the thought that my right to family inheritance and stay in the house could be subjected to conditions based on my brother's ideas of what a family should look like. My position as a gay man does not make my potential desires for family any less important or my rights to a family inheritance any less important. Every corner of this house is filled with memories that belong to both of us, and the idea that I have to pay for the right to stay in my own home feels wrong to me. This conversation raised important questions about the meaning of family, inheritance, and equality. Home is not just walls and a roof, it is a place where everyone should feel welcome and safe, a place where love and understanding are not dependent on convention. In this dialogue with my family, it became clear to me that dialogue and mutual understanding is the key to building a future in which each of us will find our place and happiness. In the quiet of our family home, skillfully taking advantage of the moment of absence of my brother's father and future fiancé, I decided to talk openly with him about our future and inheritance. His assertion that as the eldest brother, he was automatically entitled to the house caused me to object. I emphasized that seniority did not give him exclusive rights to our family property, especially while our father was still strong and willing to live in his home. My saying that my being in the house and knowing all its intricacies and financial obligations gave me a certain right to it was an attempt to explain to my brother that the idea that starting his own family automatically gave him an advantage was wrong. I was trying to convey to him that our joint inheritance should be treated on an equal footing, and that it seemed unfair and selfish to demand rent from me when I was already bearing part of the cost of maintaining the house. My words were an attempt to bring him to the realization that inheritance and family property issues require fair and respectful discussion, not unilateral demands. I emphasized the importance of preserving family ties and mutual understanding in sensitive issues such as inheritance distribution. In this dialogue, I have sought not only to protect my interests, but also to preserve the integrity and harmony in our family, emphasizing that each of us deserves to be heard and respected equally. If my brother is indeed seeking to start a family based on our father's ancestral home, his approach seems reckless to me. There is no reason to assume that he has an exclusive right to the entire house simply because he wishes to start a family. Such an assumption is incredibly unfair to both me and our father, expressing blatant arrogance and lack of respect. To suggest that my brother can rely on an inheritance as a means of securing his future without considering the many years our father still has to live is absurd. Given that our father is only 56 years old and quite likely to live for decades more, my brother's plan to expect an inheritance seems not only morally questionable, but practically unfeasible. Waiting for a parent to pass away in order to acquire ownership is an idea that strikes one as cynical. In an ideal will, the token amount of $1 should be a reminder that an inheritance is not something to be counted on as rightfully one's own. My brother doesn't seem to realize that our father could live for many more years, giving him time to find and set up his own place for his future family, rather than relying on the family legacy. This question emphasizes the importance of self-reliance and responsibility for one's own future, as well as the need to respect and care for the older generation of our family, rather than viewing their lives and possessions as a means to achieve one's own ends. My next story, our hearts are filled with love for our children, sons aged 31 and 26 and daughter aged 24, but their silence, lack of calls, messages, or visits without explanation seems to us an infinitely deep chasm. We wonder why, having traveled the road of parenting, having given them all we could, we are faced with such indifference. This lack of communication becomes a source of pain, for we have always strived to be not just parents to them, but friends and support throughout their life journey. Finding no answers to the reasons for their silence, we have decided to take a step forward in an attempt to restore the lost ties. We are planning to organize a dinner, inviting them all to bring our family back together around the same table. The hope that this evening will be a bridge across the chasm of silence and estrangement still lingers in our hearts. We strive to show them that despite all the changes in their lives, the doors of our home and our hearts are always open to them. This dinner is not just a gathering, but a symbol of our continued love and openness to dialogue, our desire to understand their world and share ours. In this manifestation of parental care and love lies our hope for a revival of trust and warmth in relationships to become again not just parents and children, but a happy family where everyone has a place and everyone feels loved and important. Faced with our children's silence after being invited to dinner, my wife and I felt the pain of their indifference. We sought family unity but were met with rejection. Our desire to provide our children with all the necessities of life seemed to find no response in their hearts. It made us think that perhaps we had missed something important in our parenting by failing to notice the underlying problems in our relationships. The estrangement of all the children emphasizes that the reasons may be more serious than just business or different life paths. This is a moment for self-reflection and possible rethinking our parenting methods. We have realized that providing for material needs is no substitute for emotional intimacy and attention to children's personal experiences. It's time to turn over a new leaf, to try to reconnect, realizing that true family bonding requires more than fulfilling basic parenting responsibilities. Our goal is to find the way to the hearts of the children, to restore lost intimacy and build relationships based on mutual understanding and deep emotional connection. A story that really surprised me. Losing an uncle I was once close to caused me mixed feelings. Despite years of separation, the sudden news of his passing reminded me of long-forgotten memories and connections. In response to my desire to honor his memory and support his family, my manager at work suggested I take a week off, giving me the opportunity to not only attend the funeral, but also spend time with my family. This decision raised questions from my girlfriend, who questioned the need for such a long absence. She questioned the depth of my grief, as my uncle and I had not been close for a long time. I explained, however, that my desire to be with my family these days was not so much due to the depth of my personal grief, as it was to support my family and perhaps restore lost ties. Thus, the week ahead will not only be a time of saying goodbye, but also an opportunity for deep reflection and revitalization of family relationships. It is a chance to reflect on how important it is to cherish the moments we spend together and how important it is to support each other despite all the trials and distances that may separate us. In the face of a family bereavement, I decided to take advantage of my manager's suggestion to take a week off to support my family and give myself time for personal reflection. My girlfriend, however, questioned the sincerity of my intentions, accusing me of allegedly looking for a way to get away from work under the pretext of a family tragedy. I tried to explain that the initiative to offer the leave came from my manager, not from me personally, and that my desire to take time for myself did not mean that I wanted to exploit the situation for my own ends. It seems to me that the right to personal time and the way in which it is spent is a matter of personal morality and ethics. Intending to spend time alone or with family after the loss of a loved one is a natural part of the grieving process and should not be condemned. The decision about how to manage the time given should be based on personal needs and ways of coping with the loss, not on external pressures or accusations of selfishness. The accusation that I am allegedly trying to cheat my employer for extra time seems unfair to me. During this difficult time, it is important for everyone to find ways to cope with grief, whether it is time with family or moments of solitude. Support and understanding from loved ones can be key in the healing process, while accusations and misunderstandings only increase feelings of loneliness and alienation. In a moment of grief and loss, when the heart seeks comfort, there is a need for private time to grieve and recover. When my manager suggested I take a week off after the loss of my uncle, it was an act of kindness and understanding that each grieving process is different. It is important to give yourself permission to live out your feelings, whether with your family or alone in the silence of your own reflection. The criticism from my girlfriend, claiming that I am exploiting the situation to gain extra time from work, reflects a lack of understanding of the grieving process and personal needs at such a time. It is my right and my need to use this time to work on my feelings internally, not to rest in the usual sense of the word. Arguing about the right way to spend bereavement leave time distracts from the essence of the grieving process. What matters is not how others perceive our grief, but how we ourselves go through it and what is important to us in that moment. If someone thinks they have the right to judge how another should grieve or use time to recover, that says more about them than it does about the person experiencing the loss.